Hi everyone, welcome to the latest VFX Notes podcast. I'm Ian Fales from beforesandAfters.com, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo, how are you going?
Catchphrase. I should have said intro section. Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning project management, production tracking, and media review platform for the creative industry. I've been using ftrack for the last 6 years, and it has helped me with all my visual effects projects. Forget about all the messy spreadsheets and the shared documents. ftrack is the best way to create a visual effects pipeline and to manage and communicate with your team and clients both locally and remotely. You can go to the video's description below for more information, or you can visit ftrack.com. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
I lost it during that part of the movie, I really did, and I knew it was coming. So that's really cool. If you haven't picked it up, we're talking about Free Guy, Sean Levi's film starring Ryan Reynolds. And Hugo, you've made me laugh, but I love it because it's that kind of film. It's a film that's nominated for the Visual Effects Oscar, which is fantastic. We'll talk about the actual people nominated in a second. But Hugo, before we jump into the film, we always quickly want to say thank you to our sponsors and to our Patreon supporters, don't we?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much for everyone that is supporting our Patreons. You know that if you want to support the podcast, you can either support it on Ian's Patreon, which is Before and Afters, or my Patreon, which is Hugo's Desk. And yeah, it's amazing to have this amount of support. Without your support, the podcast wouldn't exist, really. And you get a bunch of perks, you get the episode 3 days before everyone, and especially you get the episode completely ad-free. No commercials, no sponsors, nothing, just down to business.
Yeah. Yes. And with your own special link, I think that's one of the coolest bits, actually, as well, Hugo.
It's a secret link with some secret stuff.
Let's only talk like dude tonight.
I know. We'll do the whole podcast like that and just like randomly skip things. Opinion here. Review here. It's just like I'm sorry. I find that part fascinating, and then that's a hell of a short film, really, to be honest. It's probably the strongest part of the film. It's just hilarious.
It is brilliant. Yeah. But I mean, maybe we should briefly talk about what we think about the film. Hugo, you're a big gamer. This film, I think, surprised everyone with having a very fresh, although kind of familial take on, movies/games.
It did, yeah. Like we briefly talked about this film on the episode we did about video games, films based on video games. And I'll stand for the same thing. I've now watched the film a second time. I watched it first on IMAX, and now I watched it on Disney Plus, which is on Disney Plus if anyone wants to watch it. It also includes the extras and the behind the scenes of the DVD, the Blu-ray. I think it's funny how by sheer coincidence they've managed to make the best video game film ever made, but it's not even based on any video game whatsoever. Yeah. It's based on this pretend video game. I mean, let's of course, the film is not gonna win any Oscars. Like, it's not, well, maybe it will win the visual effects, but I'm talking about in best movie, and I'm talking about like script or everything. The film is not mind-blowing, it's not amazing, but it's just a fun, relaxing, it's a ride, it's like a ride. It's a very entertaining movie. Really recommend everyone watching if they want to laugh a bit, because it's so funny. The film is really funny. and it's really like talks about video games like people that know actually what they're talking about. I think that's why it kind of like hits all those strings, because not only they have actually guests from the video game industry, like really a lot of famous Twitch streamers like Ninja and other people there. It also has a lot of odds to Fortnite, to the video game from Unreal. It has a bunch of... It kind of reminds me a bit of Scott Pilgrim, the way that it made homage to retro gaming. This one makes homage to modern gaming. And I guess that's the thing. The film is really fun. It's like a cross between Scott Pilgrim crossed with The Truman Show. It's not as good as The Truman Show as a film, but it borrows a lot from Truman Show, and it borrows a lot, I think, from Scott Pilgrim,
I think it does. I really enjoyed it. My main issue with the film is that there is so much revealed in the trailers for this film that you could literally start watching Free Guy halfway through and have no problem understanding what's going on. Now, I get it. That's how they get people into cinemas and to watch the film in the first place. But honestly, I didn't feel like this film picked up until the second half, really. And then it became a clever film, funny, a love story, of course, and some nice action beats. But really, so much about the conceit is revealed in the trailer that I sort of was a bit bored at the beginning, and then it just got better. Yeah, it gets really good, actually. So
I know what you mean.
That's my takeaway.
I know what you mean. Because it is, and it's also like too much, and they did show way too much on the trailers. Just way too much. There's like all of that stuff. Like I remember going to the movies already, seeing all those sequences. But the film, there is like an interesting film there, and I feel like sometimes it goes a bit, it has a few loose ends on the film, and also like there's some parts that are a bit too confusing. Maybe it's a bit nuts at some moments, but I love the little HUDs. There's so many. I watched the second time now, and I now found out more little hints and little Easter eggs of other things. There's a bunch of Easter eggs to other films, and there's not only films from Disney, but also like cultural, like popular culture references, including even the glasses themselves. That's such a big ode to They Live from John Carpenter, where he sees the world. Obviously, it's not an oppressive, obey world. It's like the video game world. But it's a really smart mechanism to use the glasses, because how would you show that it's a video game otherwise? It wouldn't have been that easy without having to just cut in between a full CG sequence, I guess. So it's a really smart way to do those holograms. Now, I think the film is... Everyone should give it a chance. Like I think the film is, like I said, it's not going to win Best Picture, but it's so funny and it's so relaxing. And I think Sean Levy and his team, and especially Ryan Reynolds, like they did a good job. Like Ryan Reynolds sometimes, for me, he's a bit annoying sometimes, but I don't think he's annoying in this film. He's really funny and he's really interesting as well, and everyone on the film is interesting,
And Taika Waititi, he's like a great psychopath. So
Jesus Christ, even better than him on the film is the behind the scene featurette they've made just of him, and then you on that featurette it's on Disney Plus and on the Blu-ray, you can actually see all the B-roll that he did, because he was like literally inventing lines while they were shooting. Yeah. The B-roll is even more funny. There's some crazy shit there. No, he's outstanding on the film, and I thought it was fascinating because he's not directing it, so you really saw that he was loose completely. He was like no bars, no limitations. He was just like completely loose. He did whatever he wanted. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the visual effects. I'm going to give a teaser here that we clearly can't talk about every shot and sequence, but
otherwise it will be a 10-hour
big ones.
10-hour podcast.
There's some big ones. We're going to talk about the opening sequence. I guess it's a skydiving type scene. We're going to talk about other work in Free City. There's some fun machine learning stuff done by Digital Domain we're going to mention. I think we're going to talk for 3 hours about Dude. And then we're going to finish up with the discussion of Destruction of Free City. Plus, Hugo, here's my bonus section. We're going to talk for another 3 hours about the ode to the Joe Black car Brad Pitt hitting shot thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
an
strap yourselves in, everybody.
A historical piece of visual effects as well, yes.
Yeah. So the opening sequence, which is the title sequence, really, it's this chase that introduces you into the world, right? As basically Channing Tatum's character skydives into the world. What did you think, Hugo?
Well, damn, how you start a film like this. Yeah, this is what they call the badass shot, because it's with badass. This is a 3,000 frame long sequence with a skydive, a full, mostly a full CG city merged into a real shot city, and then it kind of blends in from a parachute into a car chase, into a 360 image, in through explosions. It's like, it is insane. It's like if you would have done every visual effects thing in one single sequence, and I don't even understand how. This is madness. Digital Domain put everything out there, I guess, and the kitchen sink, and probably a few other kitchen sinks. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It's a great way to introduce a film.
Oh, yeah.
I was really curious about this shot and the whole sequence. I talked to Digital Domain mostly about their machine learning thing, which we'll get to. But it's interesting, when they showed a few behind the scenes for this and, their final VFX breakdown, I don't think it reveals the extent of live action set pieces that were, or elements, I really should say, captured for this sequence, which include, of course, live action photography, stunt photography, green screen photography, motion control stuff, car rigs shot with motion control and green screen, actors replacing actors. I mean, as you mentioned, Hugo, there's a lot going on here. And I'm going to say right now, this is sort of characteristic of the way the film's visual effects got discussed, which is, yes, it's a heavy visual effects film, but we're not going to show you too much behind the scenes.
Yeah. Right?
There really isn't any official stuff that shows a lot of that green screen element shoots. And I sometimes think this is a marketing thing, as I've often said before on this podcast, to not give away too much behind the curtain, but not tend to show to the public that we shot a lot of this on green screen, right? However, even if they did, I thought they did a masterful job at bringing it together. Of course, DD doing so much of it in CG as well was just fantastic.
I think you're right. Like, we've talked about this on the podcast so many times. It's not the whole picture. And no disrespect to the film, I was a bit surprised that the film was nominated for the Oscar. The reason being because there wasn't much out there. We didn't really knew much about the breakdown. We didn't really knew much about the advancements or the things that were being put on these shots. By this time, when it was nominated, I don't think DD's breakdown was even out yet. Scanline's breakdown was out, so I was surprised. But then when I started reading your article and your interview, and also like reading more about this, and especially watching that short panel you made with all the supervisors, then you really start understanding that this shot must have been mind-blowing to showcase to the Oscars panel, because not only they had a full robotic way of actually having, and unfortunately, I mean, I'm going to put as many breakdowns and video sequences as I can while we're talking, but obviously I'm limited by what I could find. There was not much out there, but it's insane how they've used like an actual gimbal rig to have the car attached to it. And at the same time, they didn't have a motion control specific arm there. They've actually brought in an auto industry robot so they can move the camera faster around them, especially on the 360 image. And this is really fascinating. Like when you're listening to the visual effects supervisor here, like he's talking about that this robotic arm with the camera is moving at between 17 to 60 miles an hour. This must have been a very scary thing on set, because I've been on motion control shoots, especially in Sweden on Stilla Studios, and they have one of the Europeans' biggest motion control rig. That thing is scary when it moves. They even have alarms and little lights when it's moving, because it's so... everyone needs to stop what they're doing when that thing moves. I can't even imagine this big industrial robotic arm moving around this car at 60 miles an hour. It must have been really frightening to see this thing.
And then, but didn't you also love, apart from all that, Hugo, in the background, there'll be a helicopter crashing on fire, firing missiles, you know, like, or there'll be some other crazy hologram thing, or like, that's the kind of film it is that you're introduced to. And I think it's a visual explosion deliberately, of course.
Yeah.
But the aesthetic that they followed, and the way the visual effects are done for those free city sequences, it just works. And you're like, oh, it's a game, but it looks real, but it's a game.
Yeah.
And so I really liked that, and I thought they pulled it off. They pulled off the look perfectly, actually.
But it's funny because not even a game looks like that. So they've actually umped it to 10,000 more, you know, like, because even a video game, normally, even if you play the closest to this, which is Grand Theft Auto, the game doesn't really have like helicopters falling. It doesn't really have, there's not so much. It's like they've made the essence of one of these games and compiled it all in one single 3,000 frame long sequence. And that's why it's so fascinating. There's so much stuff. There's even, it's so funny, like at some point I was watching the sequence, and on the background, the focus, there's like a person that is glitching. It's almost like he has lag on video game. So he's like hitting the wall, but then he's glitching, and then he goes back to his place, and then he goes back to the wall again. There's like little details like this all throughout the sequence. You watch it, and you find other things, and you find another missile and another guy, and there's like a guy with a flamethrower, and then there's someone running around in the background falling from a window. It's just filled with details, and it's really wonderful the times we're living on. If you think about it, this film couldn't have been done a few years ago. Like, if you really think about it. First of all, like, even 10 years ago, it would have been done. 10 years ago, this would have been the most expensive visual effect film in the world. Probably, if it was 10 years ago, it probably would have costed $500 million to do. And it's so fascinating that we're living in a world where something like this can be even done as an intro to the film, you know? This would have been more visual effects than most films on the 2000s and 2010s, just on this sequence. And this is just a testament to how much technology has evolved, and how much... I'm not saying it's easier. It's just that what I'm saying is, like, everything is now so much more streamlined. There's pipelines in place. You can actually you can actually literally do whatever you want. I think that's what this film kind of proves, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. Although, as well, Hugo, it's the director. Sean Levy is a visual effects director. Let's not beat around the bush. All those Night at the Museum films, Real Steel. He just delivered the Atom Project, which I happened to watch on the weekend. And I think he's working on the next Deadpool with Ryan Reynolds. So he knows what he's doing. Let's put it that way.
No, absolutely.
He uses it well.
Absolutely. And also, like, the DOP, George Richmond, he's so used to these kind of things. Like, he was fundamental on Kingsman to get that look of Kingsman, especially on the fight sequences, and especially on that really crazy brawl on the church, you know. So I think, and he's also done Eddie the Eagle, which has a lot of visual effects as well, Tomb Raider. So in Rocketman, like this, and now he's doing Fantastic Beasts. Like, George is also no stranger to visual effects. So these people are on the top of their game, of course. Like, the entire team is. And I think I was just like mentioning the fact that I like to sometimes look back and look at the history of visual effects, and you kind of look back and think, it's like you were saying, oh, in the background there's a guy with an helicopter exploding against the window and then explodes the window. Like, even like 15 years ago, that alone would have been the most advanced visual effect in the world of just having an helicopter hitting a building and exploding the building. And now it's fascinating how that's now a defocused visual effects on the background. It's so funny.
But, an example of that is this bonus thing I was going to mention, which is when I think the guy is a bit dispirited at some point and goes back into the city and walks out into the street and gets hit by 2 cars and flips up in the air. Now, as far as I can tell, that's a complete homage to this Meet Joe Black sequence where Brad Pitt got killed, which ILM did the visual effects for back then. As you sort of saying, Hugo, it goes by in 2 seconds here in Free Guy, and it's great digi-double or stunt work or a bit of both, of course, but it's kind of nothing. It's kind of nothing, and it works. And it works in the context of the game inside the city as well. But, yeah, I think you're right. Like, that's a huge effect 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's...
We're becoming used to this now. It's exactly that. That's the thing, isn't it? Like, whatever. I love that. Like, well, I love it and I don't love it as well, because it also brings like sometimes a bit of disrespect for the amount of work, because like people are whatever, it's just like a guy being hit. It's nothing special. It's not nothing special. I'm sure there was a team of 10 people doing that, and it was like a really difficult shot as well to pull off. It's just that this is sheer numbers now. It's sheer numbers work. There's probably hundreds and hundreds of artists involved now, and they're all doing their 50 sequences, and it's just I find that this film is for me, when I watched it the first time, it's not like it's a turning point. It doesn't revolutionize visual effects, but it shows me something that I don't think I've seen before, which is so many in one film. Like, this is just massive. This thing is monstrous. I'm not saying every shot has a visual effects, because there's a lot of shots on The Office and with Taika, those shots don't have any visual effects, maybe some window replacements, but I'm talking about like the sheer amount that is going on screen, and just from an asset point of view, like from a texturing asset and rendering and lighting point of view, it's just insane. That sequence, I hope some other stuff comes out. I wish that there was like, some TikTok videos or some behind the scene videos of that rig of the camera and the car. Fortunately, there isn't. Yeah, it's a fascinating sequence.
Yeah. Hugo, let's talk about this really kind of unique aspect of the film that I really liked. I hope you did too. It was kind of where we saw the players in their real home environments, like a kid with his mum vacuuming behind him or something like that.
It was so
funny.
I love that. Mom, don't vacuum now. It's like,
I love it.
I'm playing the game, and he's like eating one of these one of these like candy things.
I loved it. But the interesting thing to me was, of course, on their monitors, their computer screens, you see game footage. And so it's like a low poly version of Channing Tatum or a low poly version of Ryan Reynolds. And you see that throughout the film a little bit. What did you think of those sort of sequences, Hugo? I thought they were funny.
You're saying low poly? Man, those sequences look better than any game I've ever watched.
They weren't low poly.
I know
I know
what you mean. It's like, in purpose, they're like a bit rounded, and there's like a almost like a stiffness on their animation, and in purpose, the whole thing just looks a bit shiny, and I know exactly what you mean. There's almost no depth of field. It's just like, there's a lot of depth of field, that's why. Like, it's really sharp. So, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It kind of looks like a representation of a video game. I love those sequences, especially more to the end on the fight sequence with Dude. Like, you see it again as well. Those are really, really cool. And again, this is like just another thing. It's like the film inside the film. It's just insane how they've made an extra bit of full CG. And I like that they've made it this way, because it would have looked really weird if it was the real stuff that people were watching on the screen, because that would have been a bit stupid. Why are they watching a transmission of the film on their screen? But then also I love the fact that it's in purpose like a bit more lo-fi than the rest of the film, but it's still very well made. It's like a really good art direction there, I think, because it makes homage to all these games, but so it doesn't. I guess the direction of the film makes a good homage to how video games work, but also it doesn't put off anyone that doesn't play games. Because people that don't play video games, they have an idea of what a video game is, but they don't really play a video game, so they don't really know. But if they watch that, I think they will understand, oh, this is a game. But obviously, people like me that play games, I know that that's not a game, but I can get it.
Yeah.
I think it's really smart.
A clever game within a film, within a game, within a something, within something else. Very meta. In terms of the visual effects, as far as I understand, Digital Domain did deliver a lot of that as game animation, for the monitors. But there was this point where they're in Badass's garage, with the cars, and he had to deliver some lines, and so that was done as audio from Channing Tatum and a performance, to which Digital Domain did their animation. As I understand it, then they needed to change some lines, which happens all the time, but they couldn't get Channing Tatum to redo a performance. And when DD just tried normal keyframe animation changes for the change in performance, it didn't look right. It didn't look like a game version of Channing Tatum. So DD happens to have this machine learning, approach for some facial animation stuff they've done in commercials and some other films called Charlatan. And they use that to make sure that the reanimated Channing Tatum face looked more like Channing Tatum. I thought that was really cool. It's yet another reason, if they presented this to the Academy branch, that I think the Academy thought, oh, that's something different, very different use of machine learning, AI stuff. I don't know exactly which clip it is, Hugo, or which moment I couldn't that they find redid.
I don't think there is information about which one it is. I don't think they're going to say it. Yeah. But this is fascinating because even before I talk about the machine learning, remember you were just talking about the Joe Black little Easter egg? There's another really cool Easter egg on this section, which is Channing is actually, he's doing the dance moves he does on Magic Mike. On the film, on the game. It's so cool. He literally does a little section of Magic Mike during the talk while he's walking and talking with them. It's insane. Props for him to do that while he's walking. But anyway, I think we know this is not the first time machine learning is used in the film. Of course not. We also saw some wonderful work from Veta a couple of years back with Will Smith with machine learning as well, when they were doing Junior. But this is a really fascinating way. Everyone kind of on YouTube, we've discussed this before on the podcast, but on YouTube, everyone is like crazy with machine learning, with deep fakes. We're like, oh, deep fakes are going to replace everything. Deep fakes are going to replace everything. But this is actually and I agree with you. I think that probably contributed with helping with the nomination for the Oscar. This is probably one of the first times that the deep fake technology and machine learning technology kind of solved that specific problem of not having him on set, and it was a much quicker solution for that specific problem. And I think that's where deep fake, as much as people think it's going to replace, I feel like it's going to become another tool on the arsenal of visual effects artists. When something fails, maybe they use that, and maybe if that fails, then use something else. And I think this is really interesting. And again, we don't know which shot it was, and props for that. If we don't know which shot it was, then it worked just fine.
Yeah, and here's the thing: he's a game character, so it doesn't need to look like flesh and blood Channing Tatum. But the point is, I think the director's comments while reviewing dailies of the actual shots were, it doesn't quite look right. And then DUDE has this Charlatan tool in their arsenal, and they used it. So there is a podcast interview with DUDE's VFX Soup Nikos, which is lots of fun, where you can get a lot more detail and probably properly discussed rather than my poor attempt at trying to explain the technology.
And props for the name. Charlatan must be the best name for a visual effects software I've ever heard. It's like it beats. Like, I thought Flamin' Nuke was cool, but now Charlatan, that's awesome. I hope they sell it someday, because it is a hell of a name for a VFX software.
It's actually they have one of the coolest breakdowns I've seen for a while, which is for their David Beckham Malaria Must Die commercial, where they've basically made him look older.
Oh yeah,
but the breakdown for that with Charlatan is neato, so check that out as well. There's a link on the article page, podcast page. But I just really wanted to mention that because it's just one of those standout visual effects, even though it's a tiny thing in the film.
Yeah, it is. But it's those kind of things that will, but as we know, like you can do the entire film in full CG and not really have... These little things are the things that move the industry forward. These little things are the things that are going to then be used somewhere else. I'm sure Charlatan will start to become more and more part of pipelines, and they will probably use it in more films. Those are the little stories that I'm really interested in. That's why I know I have to say, like, that's why I and you didn't pay me to say this, but I'm going to say it. That's why I love your Before and Afters website, because you focus so much your attention on these little technology marvels that are actually advancing the industry, instead of just like discussing just the random sheer amount or volume of a specific visual effects. I like that you have these little small niche stories, which are actually really important for the industry, and they don't really show anywhere else. So props for you for doing that.
Thanks, Hugo. I'll give you that $100 after the podcast.
No, I'm serious. I had no idea this even existed until you made an article of it. I had no idea that they even did use some machine learning until I saw your podcast. So it's you know how it is, like certain type of techniques just go on the way line, like they don't really get on the spotlight because everyone is just busy watching the other more important, not important, but the more fancy visual effects, so I think that's really, really cool that you do that.
Yeah. So actually the next effect that we're going to discuss, I also think it's a huge amount of work, but when the film came out, in some ways, it also went under the radar when the film initially came out, Hugo. And this is the face replacement for Dude.
Yeah.
Right? For people who don't realize, Dude is a character introduced by Taika into the game to try and get rid of Guy, Ryan Reynolds' character. But Dude has the face of Ryan Reynolds, of Guy, but he's a big, beefy guy, muscly, enormous bodybuilder. And so Lola VFX used their face replacement methodology, and we'll get into that, to do that face replacement. ILM has also contributed to a bunch of the shots because there's a fight sequence between them that involves a lightsaber and other things. But Hugo, this is the sequence that you and I just both truly love, don't we, in the film? We really do.
Oh my God, this part is amazing. I can watch this all day. Like, yeah, you're right. It was under the radar. Yeah, at the time, I remember when the film came out, everyone was just like coming up. Like, there was so many YouTube videos of how did they do this? And there were so many suggestions, like people saying, oh, it was just like rotoscoped. Oh, it was just like morphed, or it was this and that. There was so many discussions of how this was made. But until then, no breakdown was out, and there was no visual effects breakdown or even like a making of. Now there is. Like, if everyone... I'll put some footage while we're talking, while we're discussing this effect, if you're watching the YouTube version. But... if you go to Disney Plus, there is an entire 17-minute long behind-the-scene video about this, which You can also find it on YouTube as well. It's not just on Disney Plus, but it's also on YouTube, and it really goes actually quite deep. Now, it doesn't go deep into the section that actually the flame section and the compositing section doesn't show that, but it really shows in detail the on-set stuff, and also it shows a lot the volume, the egg that they had at Lola. But before we even talk about the visual effects, let me just say, this entire sequence is just funny as hell. You have the bodybuilder Aaron Reed, which, by the way, is a monster. Yesterday, I went, you know how YouTube works with the rabbit hole. You start watching something and then it's just like goes and goes and goes and goes. And so eventually, like I was researching for this podcast, and I ended up watching a tutorial video where he's explaining how his workout is. It's just like,
oh, Hugo.
But it was fascinating to watch, because this guy takes this seriously. He's like working 6 days a week. He's working 8 hours a day, and that's why he looks like he does. Like, it's just insane. He's so big. And
does that mean the rest of this podcast is 6 hours of Aaron?
Of him just like working out. No, Aaron Reed was great. This was his first film. He's a bit nuts on the behind the scenes, but this was his first film, and so it's just really funny. The entire fight, the way that he's like saying catchphrase, like I just. This was an incredibly inspired moment by everyone involved, by the writers, by the director, by Ryan Reynolds himself. But the process of making this is really complicated. And I think people don't really realize how complicated this entire thing is. We're going to break it down step by step here. But, but props to like the director, props to the DOP. Like the entire section really depended as well as a lot by the stunt coordinator, Daniel Stevens, as well. Like this entire thing is a very complex job. And it kind of like, I guess, I don't know if you want to say a few other things before we go and break it down completely. But what do you thought about the sequence?
Only that I also want to give props out to the visual effects supervisor, production soup, Sven Gilberg, for deciding to take this approach, because there are probably a few different ways to do face replacement. We talked a bit about it for Shang-Chi, which is, some of it's machine learning, some of it's shooting as close to the plate as you can for replacing actors onto stunt doubles. Some of it is motion control, which is limiting a bit for a fight sequence. So the decision to go with essentially shooting the fight loose and then shooting Ryan later in Lola's egg and using their approach gave them the most flexibility. And I think it's worth noting that that's just a decision you have to make up front and trust in your decision, which is what Sven and Sean did. So that's also something they talk about a lot in the documentary, the feature.
Yeah. And also, like, of course, there was even an extra layer on this because of the pandemic, because they kind of like closed shop, and so it actually took 6 months for them to then end up filming the egg after the actual shoot went. So it even becomes even more complicated and even more useful to have this type of flexibility. Huge props to Sven Gilbert, like the visual effects supervisor, to Sean Levy, and also to George Richmond, and of course other people, the stunt coordinator and the stunt team. The way that they've made this was so organic, and so creative, because they ended up like, of course, they did the rehearsal section where they did, like what they, I found it was really cool that they called this, when they were actually, there's a lot of footage of them training inside a room, and this is what they call the stunt viz. I found it was really cool. And so there was a mixture between stunt viz, where they figured out all the stunts on another location with wire work. They also had some boards, some drawings of things they couldn't really make up on the stunt viz. But the most cool part of this is the crew viz, what they talk about on the documentary, which is literally an embarrassing home video of all three of them pretending that they're making this entire sequence so that the crew and the entire cast knows exactly what it is. Where you have the director of the film being the Vespa, being the motorcycle element of this crew viz.
Oh my God.
But I find that this... And then it was fascinating to see it all on the boards as well. They had a big board on set. This is something we usually do on set. We always have a board with all the little papers and everything that we're doing. But it felt like really fluid. They were inventing things as they go. This is a situation where visual effects was never really on the way of this. Like, they just filmed whatever they wanted, handheld, free movement with the rig. Like, they could film as they wanted, not even thinking about the visual effects at that moment. So they filmed the entire action by just having, Aaron Reed with the tracking markers on his face, of course. And, of course, they had to shoot some clean plates, and they had to shoot some stand-ins and reference shots of Ryan doing the same sentences. But, in fact, I think this is the first time I've seen a sequence where they shot the whole thing on set, and they thought they had it, and then they went for editorial. They edited the whole thing. But it's fascinating, isn't it, Ian, to see that a lot of it was actually invented and actually created on the volume. They ended up then creating a bunch of new shots and a bunch of new sequences when they were on the egg. And this is not very common. It's not very common for you to have this flexibility to actually invent shots and literally ad-lib, do...
Yeah.
By just using the performance in Ryan, because Ryan is so good at improvising. Doing improvisation is always a no-no in visual effects, but it's amazing how they let this happen because it just made the sequence better, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm not sure that... I know what you mean about invented shots. Maybe it's more inventing dialogue.
Dialogue, yes, sorry. Dialogue. I'm talking about dialogue.
That can be, of course, Ryan Reynolds as a comedian saying new lines. And because they're obviously replacing Dude's face, they can do it. They can record that dialogue and make those changes. But I agree with you. They had to go and shoot it. Now, let's also say that it's a big fight sequence. So they've got the third element there of the stunt double, which I think was Daniel Stevens.
It was, yeah.
Standing in sometimes for Ryan. So how they managed to do maybe some face replacements there too is also pretty impressive. But you're right. The volume that Hugo's talking about is Lola's egg.
Yeah.
I think that's just the name it got given at some point. Now, Lola is, of course, known so well for de-aging and beauty work in the industry. And I think what they realized at some point was that lighting was one of the most important things with their actors. And this LED egg that they've invented... And of course, there's other kind of things around the place in terms of lighting and relighting with LED panels now. It's a bit of a, I guess it's a trademark of some photogrammetry as well out there. They get the actor in, often to their actual premises in Los Angeles, where the egg gets set up. And the actor basically recreates the same moments from the plates inside the egg with lighting that has been pre-lit to match as close as possible to the lighting that was there on set, on location on the day, which might be shadows or harsh sun lighting or indoor, whatever it is. And if you watch this footage, it's just Ryan Reynolds recreating scenes, but as you say, Hugo, improvising as well. Yeah. Again, it's all about this flexibility of the visual effects.
Well, it's fascinating on a lot of levels. Like, obviously, light direction is the most complicated thing to fake because once you film it on a live direction, you could have scanned his face and do the whole thing and then do him in full CG. You could have done that.
Yeah.
But I feel this methodology is interesting because it I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it's interesting because it allowed them. They had a rig of 6 red cameras, and so the LEDs would synchronize exactly with the footage, so the sun direction. And that's cool with this sequence because it's just the sun. They're on a beach, so it's a bit simpler because you only have one light to think about. You don't have other direction. Although they could have put more lights because they had the LED thing, but getting the light direction on spot on, and then also it's really cool that the egg has these like light cues that he allows the actor to fit into the correct eye contact, which is really crucial for these kind of things. So they had like these like red and purple and green lights that Ryan could go there and then there and then there, and knew exactly, because you could see them blink. And so you know how it is, like when you're doing this test, the eye test, when you're inside the eye doctor, you have all these lights and you're testing your accuracy with your eyes. You know how it is. Your eyes are so quick to kind of like do those kind of things. And so this is really smart to use this kind of technology almost like from eye direction for you to kind of like get that to work. And I think the reason why it works so well is that instead of trying, we have the bodybuilder, Aaron Reed, which has a completely different physiognomy from Ryan. His face is completely different. Instead of trying to get Ryan to morph into Reed's face, which is usually, in the past, I think some failures happen because of that, because you're trying to change the physiognomy to match another person's face. They did the other way around. They picked up Reed's face and change that face to match better Ryan's face. And I think that's where things work better, because then you have this footage which has the correct direction of light, it has the correct eye moment, and then by changing and using as much from the face that was shot on set as they could, to a point that on some shots they would have used the neckline. On some shots, they would have used the entire neck of Ryan. Some shots, they would just use the section like a hockey face. So it's really clever because the more you use the plate, the better. Like the better you're going to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this sequence is so well created, and it doesn't have the jarring, on certain films you have the jarring motion blur little problem, that sometimes you have with the matching of faces.
Yeah, I totally agree, and they've done a stellar job here. I would say though, and this is actually in the interview that I did with Lola's VFX suit, Cliff Welsh, Dude is a cartoony character because of the bodybuilding. And he's got these little blonde, I don't know what they're called, things going on with his hair. And Ryan Reynolds' face projected there, it looks real, but it looks cartoony.
Yeah.
Deliberately.
Yeah.
And so you get away a little bit with, a bit of artistic license here. Because, for example, if they were really putting Ryan Reynolds' face onto a bigger guy's head, it probably would have need to been stretched a bit.
Yeah.
And whatever. But they didn't do that. And it just looks a bit odd, but it looks funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think they just get away with some
but
extra things there.
I completely agree with you. Like the whole film is like that. You can get away with a lot. Like even if the visual effects might be a bit off, or maybe there's like a camera move that is a bit nuts, you can get away with it because that first intro established what we're watching. And so you watch that intro with the parachute and the guy going and jumping into the car, and then the car goes. Which, by the way, we forgot to mention, the car itself is even replaced. There's a car on set, but then they put another car there. It's just insanity of visual effects there, of just really, really complicated replacement of the car itself, of the brand. But that intro kind of like gives you, okay, this is what we're making. And then from that moment on, whatever crazy thing you put on the screen, it doesn't matter because your mind is already set. Okay, this is not real. It doesn't matter. Anything can go. And I think that's why that sequence sells. By the time, this is the end of the movie, by the time we see this section, we already are full in. We're invested, so we don't really care anymore. But what I was talking about was not that. What I was talking about is, no disrespect, but for example, on Shanxi, on some face replacements, you notice a little bit of motion blur moving between certain movements when they're fighting. And this is, of course, obviously, sometimes it's quite tricky to quite match the movement or the direction. And so in compositing or in CG, they have to kind of like stretch things a bit too far. And sometimes the motion blur kicks in a bit too much, or it kicks in too little. And sometimes it becomes a bit jarring. So there's a couple of shots on that film and on other films as well that I've watched where the face replacement kind of loses realism because of the motion blur movement of the transformation of them trying to match it. This sequence does not have that issue, and I think it must be because we don't see how they've made it in Flame. It was mostly done in Flame. Also, they used Face Tracker, which is a really popular plugin for Nuke. Shout out to Face Tracker because they're a really good plugin for Nuke to do facial replacements. So there was a combination of Face Tracker with Nuke and also Flame. Of course, Flame was the main package of this. And somehow, because they had the egg, which he moves exactly to the correct location, and he's always synced because of the color cues, he moves exactly at the same time and at the same tempo. And also it's filmed with these 6 red cameras with the shutter speed, with the correct shutter, with the correct motion blur. The whole thing fits in because you have a match. You have these red cameras that can be matched to the onset camera. And then you have, of course, the movement of the heads. And then, of course, finessing and Flame.
Yeah.
I think that's why it works,
Well, I think you're right, Hugo, except the obvious benefit of having 6 cameras is having additional slices of area of the face in case it isn't quite right. Because I'm sure sometimes it's not. And Lola, famously still, I shouldn't say it like this, but they used Flame as one of their main compositing tools, partly because of just the speed at which they can work at.
Well, it makes perfect sense. It's not even just the speed like that. I would say Flame is perfect for this. As someone that has worked at the mill for a long time when we had tons of Flames at the building, Flame is perfect for this because Flame still to this day has not just the speed. Yes, that's true. It's much faster than most compositing packages out there, but the fact that the paint system and also the strokes and also the brushes are much closer to Photoshop. You have smear brushes, you have blur brushes, you can even make your own brushes. There's a lot of paint work and technology that it was done in Flame for paint morphing and warping that is miles away from every other software. I feel like Nuke is much more advanced at highly complex full CG scenes and using AOVs and multipasses, but then Flame shines on painting. It's almost like a Photoshop for video. I feel like there's no replacement right now.
I'm confident that Lola use a range of tools, like any visual effects studio, for match moving, tracking, reprojections. They would have had a CG scan of Ryan also being used. So it's definitely Flame because that's what.
But that's where Face Tracker comes in, because on Face Tracker and Nuke, you can then, if you want, you bring in the geometry and then you can do a UV unwrap of the face, and then you can also in Nuke paint on top of the UV. If I was doing this, it would have been that process. I would have used unwrapping inside of Nuke with Face Tracker, but then I most likely would have taken the UVs into Flame, painted them in Flame, and then brought them back into Nuke to reproject them. So it's like a combination of all these apps, like Face Tracker, Flame, and Nuke, and other applications as well. It's really like how visual effects are done. They're done with so many softwares, and as much as people like to fight over which is best and bad, it doesn't really matter here. They're all together. Yeah. But this process is very smart, and I bet Lola was so happy that they could talk about it, weren't they? Because they don't get to talk much about their stuff.
They don't always get to talk. But seeing as there's a 17-minute documentary about their egg, I think they felt like they could talk about it. But yeah, there is a bit of a secret sauce to some of this, Hugo, which is, and Lola And every visual effects studio has a bit of a secret sauce to how they end up putting it together. I mean, the egg is the huge part of it, but Lola has just done so much work with actors' faces. They know what a nose is meant to do if you change it. They know how the hockey mask kind of extraction and reprojection kind of works, right? And they know how to fiddle with hair and
they have
and
the talent. They have the people that have been doing this for decades. They have the talent. It's when you get these kind of like it's the same when we used to do a lot of beauty work at the mill, and there were artists, super talented artists at the mill that have been doing beautification for like 10 years. They know exactly what to do, you know, to make sure someone looks younger, or make sure that some, you know, soggy arms are not there, you know, like there's all sorts of that kind of work going into everything, both film, commercials, and TV, that people don't even know about it. And unfortunately, most of the times we can never talk about it. I did so much beautification that I will never be able to say, that I will never be able to put on my show reel, or even mention that I've made to some really famous singers and actors and all sorts of people. But it's cool that they got to have their own making off on the Blu-ray. I thought it was amazing that they got to do this, you know.
Yeah. I'm a bit upset, Hugo, that you don't do any de-aging on us for the podcast. Like, you've got time, right? Come on.
Yes, exactly.
Don't you just press a button?
Well, that's fine. A 1 hour and a half long single shot track, would probably become like an article on your magazine, because it would have been so complicated to do.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the last thing we were going to talk about, which kind of happens before and after and during the dude fight, actually, which is a number of destruction scenes in very sort of pixelated game style of Free City. Many of them, if not all of them, were done by Scanline, which, you know, I feel like is still the go-to studio for what could be called destruction work. And here it's beautiful. There's like scenes of the car racing in between buildings, and, you know, the pixelated side of, not side of the buildings, but the buildings are sort of crushing them, but with a pixelated look. Then the buildings actually deconstruct at one point in several wide shots.
Yeah, as like
some of these shots
server,
are massive.
Yeah, as he destroys server by server, you see one building, building, another building. Azteca is like destroying servers with an axe.
Yeah, I love that.
No, I this breakdown is nuts, isn't it? I don't even know where to begin. Like this thing. As you know, Scanline has been like giving these kind of shots for us for a while now. I know that, but there is so much stuff rendering at the same time, and this entire thing is like an IMAX scene as well. Like the whole thing was, I saw it on IMAX. Like I don't even know how to start, because you also have footage, of course. They went out and shot the some plates. There are some plates even on that car with the destruction, especially when the buildings are compressed. If you look closely, there are plates there, so they did shoot some car stunts, and they did shoot some plates as reference, which is always the best way to go. But literally, I think 90% of the shot is replaced by this gigantic simulation particle system of pixel destruction that happens as Taika destroys the server one by one. It's mental. That entire section is mental, while they're being squeezed between the buildings, and then they just pass through the two buildings at the end. This is just one sequence. The whole thing happens all the time. You also have people as well. There's like these amazing shots of people running for their lives, and then one by one they just disappear. They vanish one by one with these like particle systems, and some of them fall to the floor. It's really cool that you see the floor of the game. This is a very typical thing. Like that. Yeah, you see this on games all the time. When you have glitches on video games, people sometimes fall through the floor. There's like all sorts of YouTube videos about that when they're trying to make fun of glitches on games. And it's so cool that they've kind of like brought all those little language of video games of the glitches into this thing. But but the glitches are made in such a photorealistic way. It's great art direction here.
Yes, there's one particular upshot of the buildings twisting, as in deconstructing with the characters in the foreground. I would love to do a befores and afters deep dive on just that. And I did get a chance to speak to Scanline's VFX suit, Brian Grill, who's done so much destruction over the years and great visual effects. But I might come back to him after the Oscars and just ask about that single shot. It's really cool, the twisting buildings.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. The whole thing, like even again, on this film happens all the time. Sometimes you just see stuff on the background, like little glitches happening, and little buildings disappearing, and little cars disappearing, people vanishing, and it's just background stuff. But obviously, there's a lot of wide shots. But no, this I think the art direction is really what really sold me on this, because they've managed to bring the essence of how a game looks when they glitches, but they made it look cool. They made it look stylized and cool, and again, props for the Scanline team and also the direction of the film, because this is really much easier for people that don't play games to understand what's going on. They've managed to develop a language here that allows both gamers to relate, but also people that have never played games to understand. And I think that's because if it was too glitchy and too close to the real thing, people would have probably thought it was like a mistake or too glitchy or too much like it wouldn't really connect because people haven't seen it. But it also is not cartoonish. It's really realistic. So I think it was the perfect choice here, the perfect art direction. Must have been some really amazing concept arts. Not that we've ever seen them, but it must have.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And isn't it? It's another classic thing that we've discussed many times on the podcast, which is it goes by relatively quickly. It's a big sequence, and in any other film it would be the biggest scene ever. Which is why you bring in the big guns to do it.
Yeah.
Like Scanline. But it totally works. It's almost not too over the top, because otherwise it would look like 2012 or something else. It's sort of just enough to sell the craziness.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we mentioned Scanline's work there, because it's really cool. They also did that kiss sequence between
the particle.
I like that too.
Yeah,
and it's a really kind of different kaleidoscopic way of showing this game real world.
Which is again another prop for the direction of this film, where they're showing something highly complicated in a simple way. Like, because a couple of minutes before that sequence, I think maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes before, we see the graph on the screen. We see like the node graph of the game, and we see how the AI of Free Guy works, of Guy works, and then they kind of like make a representation in CG of this wireframey node graph coming out of his head when he kisses, and then all the ramifications of the AI goes back and has all the memories back. I found that I love those things. I love trying to bring the audience into something that is so technical that it probably would have not looked good for them to watch. And I thought it was a great moment.
It worked well here, and it communicated the story perfectly.
That's why I think the film is so interesting. Again, the film showcases video game language, and that's why I think it's a success. The film was a success, and I think not just from a monetary point of view, but I think a success as a film itself. People liked the film and they really enjoyed their time with the film. It really, really showcases the video game language on an average way of showing it. Like it basically allows normal, like people that don't play games, like people that are not in this industry or not on this world, to still fully understand it. And I think that's why. Because it's tapping into the popular culture. It's the same with Scott Pilgrim, where it taps into that retro vibe with the pixelization and the Mario and all those little hints of Zelda and all those little old games. But even people that are not watching the games, they know that it's like that, So it's really clever. I find it's really clever.
And to take that even further, and maybe we'll wrap up after this, Hugo. it's not just tapping into the games, but seemingly once Disney bought Fox, it felt like they could... I don't know, personally, I could look this up, I suppose, whether some of the Marvel references and Star Wars stuff was in there before Disney took over.
Probably not.
Probably. Yeah. Oh, who knows?
You're right, because you have the shield and you have the Hulk hand, which I'm assuming that would have been ILM because it has to look like the other versions. And so I'm sure they were the ones making the lightsaber, the Hulk, and the shield. I'm not saying I know this for sure. I'm just assuming that's the case.
I think they did do the shots, but I mean, in other Marvel films, other companies have done Hulk.
One thing I don't really know why. I need to say this. I don't know if you notice on the behind the scenes, for some reason they have a shield on set, but it's white, the Captain America. For some reason the shield is blurred. I don't know why. On the behind the scenes they put like a blur mask around the shield, and I cannot understand why they would have done that on the behind the scenes.
Well, it could be lots of reasons. I mean, you sometimes see in behind the scenes that crew hats and T-shirts are blurred.
And shirts. And
I know this is a prop. I don't know. I just
found it really weird because because it's all white. It looks like it has nothing there, but maybe it does have something there. I don't know. Maybe they didn't at the time still knew if they were going to use Captain America or not, and that's why it was blurred. It could be that. Again, all guesswork. If anyone knows, please leave a comment on below on the YouTube channel.
All I can say to that, Hugo, is what the shit? Which is what Chris Evans says when he's watching it on his mobile phone. Oh my God. All right. Hugo, we need to wrap this up. It's been a lot of fun going back to Free Guy, and I really want to congratulate the film for being nominated, all the visual effects artists. The one person we didn't quite mention who was a nominee is Dan Sudik, the special effects supervisor, who's also nominated for Spider-Man No Way Home.
He has two shots, huh? He has two shots.
Yeah, he's done a lot of Marvel stuff too. So awesome practical effects stuff in the film as well. I
wanted to say also to everyone here watching, like we are by the time you're watching this, we do have like a playlist on YouTube with all the 5 nominees. So we've covered all 5 films, and you can go and watch or rewatch the entire coverage we're doing with the 5 films. So I'll make sure to put that playlist on the description so that you can kind of before the Oscars maybe have a look.
Yeah. And now Hugo is going to say who's going to win, right, Hugo? No, just joking.
Placeholder here. Winner of Oscar here. I'll just replace it then when it's done.
Friendly gesture. Okay. All right. Hugo, lots of fun to chat. As always, thank you for doing this. Thank you to our sponsors and our Patreon supporters. We love you all. And Hugo, any final comments on the film, on the game crossover? I know that's probably one reason why you really loved it.
I did. And I can't wait to see. It looks to me like there is a bond, like a friendship growing here with Sean Levy and Ryan Reynolds as well.
Of course.
Because now they're going to be doing their 3rd film together. It seems to me that they are really getting along. And so I can't wait to see what they come up with. I can't wait for Deadpool 3. Because Deadpool 3 with Marvel now... Do you imagine the amount of jokes that the potential opens for? Because they can actually joke with everything for real and not just have weird things that happen on the second one and the first one, joking with X-Men but not being able to call them X-Men. So I find that this is going to be fascinating. If they really have free range, like this is going to be mental, I think, the 3rd film. So this is really... Sean Levy is something to watch here because I think he's doing some cool stuff, some really interesting, cool stuff.
I agree. Awesome. Thank you, Hugo. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. See you later.
Bye.